first question, because a lot of people will go, is it a trend? Should we be eating this much protein? Can we get enough in our diet? How much is enough?
It's quite embarrassing to say this, like after doing this for so long and looking at the research. I did the calculation looking at what I was consuming, and I was massively under consuming. My sort of party line prior to this was, we don't need to worry about protein, we need to be worrying about fiber. And one of the things I got wrong was protein.
Dr. Rupy Aujla is a medical doctor and best-selling author, redefining healthcare by putting food and protein at the heart of medicine.
Got a real nutrition pro to sit alongside me. Tell me what happened back in 2009 that made you redirect this path.
I had my first episode of atrial fibrillation, and what I thought was going to be like a one-off episode actually started happening 2 to 3 times per week. The one person who said that I should really think about my diet and lifestyle was my mum. In came leftovers, in came nuts and seeds, in came a more plant-based approach.
How do you encourage somebody to look at their meal?
What we should be leaning into more of is plant-based proteins. You're not only getting the protein, but you're also getting the fiber. You're getting a really good dose of this anti-inflammatory medicine. And I have this thing called BBGs: beans, berries, greens, seeds and nuts every single day.
You're laughing because you know what I'm about to bring up. I was reading today's interview and thinking, what else is really on topic right now? And I'm just going to throw in an IV drip of NAD.
Yeah. The fact that people can say, oh, okay, well, we're going to take this and it's going to somehow get from your bloodstream into your mitochondria and it's going to have this magnificent benefit on longevity, I think is real far stretched, where actually, if you want the best bang for your buck, if you're interested in mitochondrial health, which people should be.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to tuning in and listening to the show. It means a huge amount. And connecting with all of you is something that I absolutely love as part of this journey of growing the show. One of my biggest goals of 2025 is doubling the reach of this show. And I can't do that without your support. So I would love to ask you a favor. If you can press subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to. This helps us reach more people. And for me, elevating women in science is so fundamental and ethical and scientific information. So if you feel the show empowers you and gives you the information that you've been seeking, I would love to ask a favor in return and to hit that subscribe button and help me reach the goal that I've set for the show of 2025. Thank you. I can't believe we're finally doing this.
Yeah, I know. It's been a long time coming.
It's been such a long time coming. You and I have both been in the well-being, medicine, science, health, nutrition field for 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we're sitting down to have a conversation.
I know. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's good.
It's really good. And I feel like I wanted to start this conversation on protein and anti-inflammatory foods and what that consists of, and NAD drips and supplements, and I was like, great, I've got a real nutrition pro to sit alongside me and we can really delve deep. And then I was like, I actually want to start with you. So we're going to get onto all of those things. But I actually wanted to start with you because I know that people come into this field normally from a personal reason.
Yeah.
I did. And, I've never actually sat down and asked you this question. So I wanted to kind of start there, really. And for all of our listeners to know you, you have gone on, how many books have you written now? How many bestsellers?
This is the 5th one.
Yes, there we go. So this is how much of a high achiever this man is. 5 best-selling books, a tech company on food and nutrition, literally turning medicine into food and healing mechanisms. And tell me why. Tell me what happened back in 2009 that made you redirect this path.
Yeah. So my origin story, everyone has an origin story. And I think it's really interesting to dive into that because I think it really reflects on how you talk, how you think, who you connect with, etc. So I went to med school in 2003. I did 6 years. Prior to that, I was science kid, not really into nutrition whatsoever, wasn't really into sports. There was no real interest in nutrition apart from how much I loved cuisines. My mum had instilled this in me when we were growing up. We obviously had Punjabi Indian food, we had Sri Lankan food, but my mum was really exploratory, so she would do Italian and American barbecue and all this kind of stuff. And we had a nice healthy balance, I would say, between whole unprocessed cooked food from scratch with some fish fingers, some unhealthy items and stuff. But she was really into food. And throughout med school, I was just like, typical medical student, but I knew how to cook. And so that was always with me. Like I was able to do brisket, and like we could do barbecue, and then I would use spices. And my mum taught me how to make a Thai basil lemongrass curry in my first year. So I got this reputation of being like the guy that could cook, like throughout the whole of med school, which is something that I think is important to mention, because you kind of carry these labels with you wherever you go. And then 2009, I started work in the NHS. I worked in a big DGH, and 3 months into the job, typical junior doctor lifestyle, cereals, sandwiches, pasta, whatever you could grab your hands on, something quick, cheap, easy, whilst you were working like crazy hours. I had my first episode of atrial fibrillation, which is...
Explains what that is for everyone.
Sure. It's a heart condition where your heart beats irregularly due to, it can be a number of different causes. Sometimes people get it because they've had an infection. Some people have it because they've taken drugs. Some people have it just for no apparent reason, but we tend to see it in a much older age group, above the age of 55, 60. Growing in terms of prevalence, very, very unusual for a previously fit and well 24-year-old with no medical history, no medications, no alcohol drinking history, nothing like that. And I remember I was writing in the notes at the nurse's station during a really busy string of shifts that I'd done. It was like 8th day or something of these shifts. And that's when I felt my heart beating, not just irregularly, but also very, very fast. I was going at 200 beats per minute, as it turned out. And just for context, if people don't understand, think of like when you go and you do a spin class, or you do like a HIIT training or whatever, and you wear a heart rate monitor. I can only really get mine to like 180, 185. So it's really up there, and you feel it straight away. It makes you feel like you want to faint, like, you don't know what's going on. I was just sat down, and it took me a little while to actually speak to my senior, who is this lovely registrar. And I said to her, like, would you mind feeling my pulse? I think I'm going a bit fast. And I was really sheepish about that, because in medicine, as I'm sure it's the same in many other careers, you don't want to show any weakness, that you can't do it. Like, oh, this person's a bit of a weakling. They don't have what it takes to be like a medic. And there's this real sort of alpha bravado type that really comes out, because that's sort of what you need in medicine, I would say, even though it's kind of unfashionable to say that right now. I actually do think you need a little bit of a switch in your brain that sort of ignores pain. So with that in mind, I asked her, and honestly, like within half an hour, bleep taken off me, stripped of my clothes, put into a hospital gown, connected to a cardiac monitor, because it was very, very clear from my ECG that I was in florid atrial fibrillation. And I didn't have to have a cardioversion procedure. Like, I wasn't shocked or given any chemicals at that point, because my blood pressure was stable and I wasn't having any chest pain. And just for the listener, when you have atrial fibrillation, what happens is your blood can get quite sticky. And sometimes that can lead to issues. It can lead to clots forming and then going to your brain, where you can cause a stroke. It can lead to heart attacks or cardiac arrest. It can lead to clots going to different parts of your body, like the gut, and that leading to gut ischemia. So luckily I wasn't at risk of anything like that. They monitored me. They gave me some antiarrhythmic medications. I think it was flecainide at the time. And I reverted after 24 hours. And I thought that was my one and only episode. Maybe I hadn't had enough water. Maybe I had too many cups of tea. There wasn't like a clear mechanism. I was doing like shifts. It wasn't like I'd been out drinking the night before or anything like that. And what I thought was going to be like a one-off episode actually started happening 2 to 3 times per week. Yeah. And it was lasting anywhere between 24 and 36 hours. And it was just like really relentless. And I remember feeling this sense of embarrassment that I didn't have what it took to be a medic, and I had to keep on taking like time off. Like every time I flipped into AF, it was like what can I do now? And the drugs that I was taking, as in the medications, would make you feel very, very nauseous and a little bit like kind of woozy, for
Sounds
want of
like
a better word.
GLP-1 drug.
Yeah, it was just wasn't a nice place to be, and like I'm alongside my colleagues, right? They're eating the same stuff as me. They're not working out like me. They're tolerating the same stresses. I'm a healthy weight. I look quote unquote normal. I don't have any pre-existing issues. So I just remember feeling this sense of like ungratefulness and like unfairness and frustration that I wasn't able to keep with my colleagues.
So what was the big moment? What was the crash?
So
what was the realization?
The realization for me was like, I'm going to have to do something about it. And I went to see some of the best cardiologists, and they all pointed me in the direction of having what's called an ablation procedure, which is where you put a guide wire into the main vessel and then you burn an area on the pulmonary vein to stop misfiring cells. They couldn't ascertain a cause other than that. So there wasn't something called a re-entry pathway. There was nothing morphologically or structurally wrong with my heart. It was simply I was going to AF and no one could really figure out. And so I was offered this procedure, which had a really high success rate at the time, particularly for someone like myself. I was a good candidate for it. But the one person who said I should really think about my diet and lifestyle was my mum. And my mum's not a medic. She's not science trained. She's, Indian mum, very, very intelligent. And I just thought she was bonkers. She had no idea what she was talking about.
Back in 2003, I'm just going to say, nutrition wasn't spoken about very much.
No.
When I went to retrain, everyone told me I was mad.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely.
Nothing was taught. I mean, in the context of my medical degree over 6 years, like when I was out in 2009, like I can't remember any lectures. I'm sure we had one or two, but definitely nothing of substance. And so this idea that I should clean up my diet and do some meditation was just completely bonkers to me. But if anyone knows a persistent Indian mum, you can't ignore them, and nor should you, because
the wisdom that she is bringing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so with the blessing of my cardiologist, I ended up, changing my diet. Out went the cereals and the soggy sandwiches, in came leftovers, in came nuts and seeds, in came a more plant-based approach. I started eating more greens. I started swapping out the refined carbs. I got rid of pasta. I just did loads of quote unquote normal healthy things. And I had no direction. I hadn't spoken to a nutritionist. I was just sort of leaning into my heritage and what I know is whole and unrefined and all the basics. I started doing meditation. I started doing breath work. I started doing just sleep hygiene, just very, very basic things. And over the course of this whole time period, I was monitoring my AF episodes. And I remember just thinking okay, it's been 3 months and I haven't had an episode. And I used to get them 2 to 3 times a week. What's going on? And then that stretched to 6 months, and that stretched to 12 months. And then it was this realization that it went from 2 to 3 times per week to 0.
And you're still doing the same job?
Still doing the same job, never took any sort of days off, never stopped being a doctor, wanted to continue my training. There was one thing I just did not want to let go of, and that was being a doctor. Because there were some people suggesting that maybe I should take time off, maybe I should do something else, maybe I should reframe my training, because at the time it was foundational year training. And I remember thinking, no, I've worked for 6 years to get to this point. I know what I want to do. I wanted to do surgery at the time. I'm fastidious about it. I don't want to give up my day job. I can tolerate it. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but there were times when I was doing a shift and I was in AF. I was I should have been admitted, the patients that I was clerking in, but I was just grinning and bearing it. And you can imagine the feeling that you're on a treadmill and you're working and you're doing a busy shift. It was not a nice feeling, and I would go through this for many shifts over that couple of years period. But then it dawned on me. I was like, well, this is crazy. Somehow this has gone away. No one said that it was going to go away, and my cardiologist said it will probably come back, but it hasn't come back. why on earth is this possible, and why wasn't I taught about nutrition at med school?
And why was that not given to you as a procedure to take, as something that I can't say preventable because you've already got it, but as a lifestyle intervention?
Yeah,
and I think about this similarly to when people go to the GP for so many different things, whether it's mental health, whether it's fertility, like so little is spoken about lifestyle interventions, right? And I kind of think, imagine if you coupled those two things together. Imagine if someone with depression or fertility problems got the medical interventions they needed alongside the nutritional protocols. Like you would have such a better outcome because you'd be doubling up.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
And I think about it from the perspective of a medic as well, who doesn't have any nutrition training because they just haven't had any during their med school. If someone comes to you and they're like, yeah, I know you're saying that I should be doing this ablation procedure, and like you're a professor of cardiology, you've presented on this, you've looked at the recurrence rates, you've looked at the safety protocols, like this is what you've built your private practice on. But I'm also thinking about doing this diet stuff. What do you reckon? Taking their position, I'd be like, you're mad. Don't do that. Do the ablation. Like it's simple, safe, it's effective. Yeah, clean up your lifestyle if you want, like, do what you want. But like there was no direction given to that. And I can sort of understand why you wouldn't. But to your point, at least giving it alongside and actually being knowledgeable about it is something that we should all be. And I think a lot more medics are these days. We're definitely getting in tune to it. And it's not the same as like, oh yeah, I do lifestyle medicine. I tell people not to eat refined products. I tell them not to eat processed foods. I tell them to eat a bit more fiber. It's not a tick boxing exercise in that respect. Like people aren't stupid. Like they know like these are the basics. They need help. They need personalized direction. They need to have a conversation about exactly what that means to them, which is why I think I've really explored food through the lens of not just nutrition and what's evidence-based, but also what's relevant to the individual. And being a GP in London, I speak to people from all over the world, like Sri Lanka, Jamaica, Korea. Like I'm not going to be recommending kale salads to every one of those individuals. It's going to be personalizing it. And this is what I was doing. Like in 2011, 12, whenever I started my GP training, I got this reputation of being the GP that would talk to folks about nutrition. And that's why my clinics will always go long. That's why I was inundated with requests. And that's essentially where I got the idea of putting some recipes online under this guise of Doctor's Kitchen, just to make my clinics run a little bit more efficiently, because I was writing down, recipes for overnight oats time and time again. I was like, there's got to be an easier way to scale what I'm doing now. And it's interesting because like, again, I'm sort of in the same position where I need to scale what I'm doing right now. And hopefully we're on the cusp of doing something like that with AI.
Iron is one of the most common deficiencies that I see in clinic, especially in women. And it's not just about feeling tired. Low iron can impact your energy, your focus, your mood, and even your immune system. It's something we really need to be aware of, because if left untreated, iron deficiency can become very serious. Now, UK data shows that around 20 to 35% of women aged 18 to 50 do not meet the recommended dietary guidelines for iron intake. And if you're pregnant, menstruating, or following a vegetarian or vegan diet, your needs are even higher, and therefore you're more at risk. So that's why I often recommend Spartone. Now, this is a naturally sourced iron-rich water that comes from the Welsh Hills. It contains ferrous iron, the most absorbable form, with studies showing up to 40% absorption. So your body can actually use what it takes in. Now, it's also incredibly gentle. It's one natural ingredient, there's no harsh tablets, and there's no digestive issues. I use it myself, and it is my go-to in clinic. You can pick up Spartone at Boots, and if you've been feeling low on energy, it's absolutely worth checking in on your iron with your doctor or GP. Yeah, well, I want to talk to you about that. And I think it's so interesting because we always have a personal mission on I think if you are as dedicated as you've been, there's a personal mission behind it, right? And it's amazing to hear that, 15 years later, are we? I can't do my maths that quickly, but you've not had any more episodes.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And you've now got a new book come out, which is around protein. So I feel like I need to start there, because in the Substack Compassionate Cure 5 Questions,
Yeah.
which, by the way, you all need to go and listen to. It was amazing. You spoke about a cocaine phone versus a Kel phone.
Yeah.
And you will have to go and listen to that episode if you want to know what that is. But you spoke about the one small change that's had a big impact is changing your breakfasts from sweet to savory. And you mentioned it there. You used to live on cereals and, you know, lots of sweet, quick processed foods, which also I do find ironic that most hospitals are just laced in only processed foods. It's like it's a food desert in the hospital. So you made this, like, obviously one quick change, which was your breakfasts, which was your first entry point. Now, I'm sure, I mean, you've read a book on it. Now protein's having a big old moment. It's become like, it's become the new kale.
Yeah.
Why do you think protein's having such a moment right now? I guess that's like the first question, because a lot of people will go, is it a trend? Like, should we be eating this much protein? Can we get enough in our diet? How much is enough? There's so many questions that I want to debunk in the protein space. But why do you think now it's having such a moment?
I honestly don't know why the hype is sort of galvanized of recent, but I know it's here and it's here to stay. So when I did my nutritional medicine master's at University of Surrey, which is a phenomenal institution, like the caliber of lectures and the professors out there and the research that they do is really, really like absolutely phenomenal. That's kind of when I realized that my diet, whilst it served me really well during my mid to late 20s, early 30s, was deficient in a way that I didn't realize until my late 30s. And we had this lecture, I think it was from Dr. Adam Collins, who does a lot of work on ergogenic acids and performance for athletes. That was when the penny dropped that whilst my diet was like plant-focused, colorful,
fibrous,
quality fats, lots of fiber, you know, beans as my protein source and all this kind of stuff. I remember, like, you know, like thinking that I was doing
well
exactly the right thing. I'm absolutely smashing this. Then I was like, gosh, I haven't actually figured out the amount of protein that I'm consuming every single day. And as someone who likes to work out every single day, I don't think I've really done the math. It's quite embarrassing to say this, like, after doing this for so long and looking at the research. And then I did the calculation looking at what I was consuming, and I was massively under consuming compared to what I should be eating as someone who works out regularly. And then the question was, okay, so I should be eating about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, right? We'll go into the nuance of this a little bit later if you like.
That's my next question.
Yeah. I wonder if other people would benefit from having a similar amount or a higher target than the current guidelines of 0.8 grams. Because my sort of party line prior to this was, we don't need to worry about protein. We need to be worrying about fiber. Everyone in the UK consumes enough protein. Where we're really failing is fiber. We should be having at least 30 grams of fiber. Some people would benefit from more. Roundabouts there, trying to get most of it from whole unprocessed foods as much as possible. Grains, greens, you know, legumes, all that good stuff. But then I realized the reason why the protein requirements seem to be met by the vast majority of the population is because the protein requirements that we have set are set at 0.8 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight per 24 hours, which, as it turns out, is pretty low. And I would say,
it was actually based on sedentary old men.
Yeah.
That's how the traditional guidelines were made. And so we're kind of giving that reference to a younger, healthy population, which I think where it becomes a bit skewed.
I think the whole idea of it being a singular number is flawed in so many different ways, because it's not respectful of lifestyle, life changes, things like breastfeeding. My wife's just gone through. We're looking at her protein requirements. Really hard to get those up there, actually, in line with the current evidence. And that's when I sort of went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and I looked at some of the protein research that has been going on over the last 5-10 years. And they looked at, like, you know, they did muscle biopsies on people who are sedentary versus exercising the leg, people in their 60s, people post-menopause. And it turns out we need to be consuming a minimum of 1.2 grams. And actually, when you speak to researchers in the field, and you have to realize some of the caveats of this, because unfortunately a lot of protein research is funded by the egg industry or the dairy industry or the beef industry. But that being said, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that we should be consuming more. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be consuming more meat, more ultra-processed protein bars, more ultra-processed protein powders, but there are healthier ways in which to get plant-based proteins that have the added benefit of fiber and all the other phytonutrients that we know are healthful for us as part of our holistic diet. So that's when I started shifting and then I did the math on beans as well. And I was like, okay, 8 grams of protein per 100 grams of cooked beans. I need to be consuming circa 35 to 40 grams every single meal. If I'm having like a good handful of chickpeas and thinking that's my protein source, I'm under consuming protein.
And it's not a full protein.
Which
we're going to go into in a minute.
Yeah.
But before you carry on, I just want to read a couple of stats that's going to back up what you said. So this is women, not men, but and men I know are very similar on this. Only 38% of UK women aged 19 to 64 hit the recommended daily protein intake, which we know just said is 0.1, and that's from the NDS survey in 2024. Newer studies suggest the optimal intake is probably closer to 1.2, not 0.8, especially for aging and recovery. And that's in a review, a Better Analysis 2025 review that you've just kind of mentioned. So I think a lot of people, when we're kind of looking at protein as a whole, when I had Dr. Stacey Sims on here, who's been on here quite a few times now, she actually recommends a little bit higher, maybe even up to 1.6, depending on your activity levels and where you are in your life stages, for women anyway. So I wanted to unpack it here because most times people will go, okay, well, I need 25 to 30 grams of protein per sitting. And then the opposing argument to that is, well, I can't go past the 30 grams a sitting because I won't be able to, use all of that protein. So what about protein distribution? So let's just kind of unpack this part here. So we're kind of going, well, the new research is showing the baseline, we should be looking at 1.2. How do you encourage somebody to look at their meal through the day, and how much should they be optimizing throughout the day?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things in there. There is this idea that you have to consume a minimum amount of 25 or 30 grams of protein to start this process of muscle protein synthesis. Actually, I think you can achieve this from lower doses. So even if you only have the opportunity in a meal to have 15 grams or 20 grams, any amount of protein is still going to be utilized in your body. It's not going to be I'm going to consume under the threshold, ergo, I'm not going to have any of these benefits. You are still going to have some of those benefits. Protein distribution, I think, was really popular as a topic, particularly amongst gym goers, and getting that sort of good dose of protein in that 60-minute window after exercise, because that's when you're going to get more assimilation of those proteins, et cetera. I think newer research suggests that you've got a much wider window of opportunity to consume your protein. So I'm much more interested in getting your protein target for you in your 24 hours. So I'm less about okay, you need to hit exactly these amounts in exactly these packages or these meals, multiple in these windows of time every single day. So I would say figure out the total amount of protein you should be consuming. My personal opinion is 1.2 is a minimum. I think there are some benefits at 1.6 if you exercise, if you're over the age of 55 or over the age of 50, if you're postmenopausal,
and that's because your protein needs go up.
Yes, because a number of reasons. Your ability to digest protein tends to go down as we get older. Maybe that is because of digestive enzymes. Maybe it's because of your microbial distribution. So that tends to decline, as we know, as we age as well. Your immune system also has a knock-on effect. Maybe that's because of microbes. Quite a complicated area. But you're right. We need to consume more because we don't absorb as much protein. The other sort of more pragmatic perspective, And especially as someone who's treated lots of geriatric patients and has seen geriatric patients at their worst in hospital, your appetite just disappears. And it's really hard to actually consume enough for your needs as well. So you've got this double whammy of issues that are occurring in these older age groups. The benefits of more protein beyond 1.6 to 2 or 2.2, I think you have to balance against the issue of over consuming energy. And I don't really like to talk about calories too much, but I think it's really important to be aware that it is a very important part of the equation when it comes to metabolic health. And when you start pushing, particularly if you eat protein from a blend of animal-based products and plant-based proteins, which I'm a fan of, if you're skewing more towards the animal-based proteins, you risk over consuming that in the form of excess calories
and the fats.
And the fats as well. If you're having like fattier cuts of meat or fattier cuts of red meat, whatever, you risk over consuming calories. And then there's less space for you to have from other sources like nuts and seeds that I think are something that we should be leaning more into. So that's why I think a healthy middle ground is like 1.2. It's higher than what we're consuming right now. It encourages you to really think about that breakfast protein that we'll talk about in a bit, because I think there are wider benefits beyond just the total protein intake. And it also means that you are protecting all the other things that protein is responsible for. So not just your muscles, but your bone health, your immune health, all the sort of products of proteins that we have in our body that no one really fully appreciates. And hopefully when people like read the book Healthy High Protein, they'll have a new lens in which to look at protein, because it's not just about meat and muscles. It's about much, much wider aspects of our physiology.
I've watched the science of adaptogens grow personally over the last few years, and I've become more curious in their role in nervous system support, focus, and resilience, because adaptogens basically buffer the cortisol that gives us that stress and anxiety. But here's the thing, quality is everything. Most adaptogens on the market don't actually contain enough of the active compounds that you see in clinical studies to make a difference. That's why I've partnered with London Nootropics. These guys only use clinical studied standardized extracts. This is really, really important to get the benefits that you're seeing in clinical research. And they work with Hephaestus, Europe's leading mushroom bioscience company. They have high bioavailability. They use incredible ingredients like KSM66, ashwagandha, and rhodola life. And these are the active ingredients that you need to see the difference. They have lots of different blends. Flow gets me into deep focus with lion's mane. Zen helps support my calm and steady my clarity with ashwagandha. And Mojo gives a clean lift, no crash. And Mush Love made with fantastic fungi with 3 Hephaestus mushrooms to elevate your day. Enjoy 20% off and use code LiveWellBeWell. They come in these fantastic little sachets and they're great for traveling too. So I think when people think, maybe they're listening to this when they're on a bike or they're in a car or they're on a run, maybe they're watching this on YouTube when they're in the evening. And sometimes I'm aware that the terminology that we use can be really confusing for people. And they're like, okay, 1.2 grams per body weight for myself. Didn't go to nutritional science school. What the hell is that? So like if someone's trying to break it down, let's say a 35-year-old, I'm just putting myself in the shining right now, 35-year-old woman, you know, and a 40-year-old man with the 2 case studies sat here. How much should we be looking at throughout our day? Like, what does that actually look like in terms of food? Because this is literally your wheelhouse. This is literally what you do. You show people how they can consume that practically, but also deliciously, I just have to add. Yeah. It's very true, through the day. So how can one look at it in terms of like meal size and plate size? Because I do think that sometimes when we start talking about grams, people are like, well, what even is 25 grams?
It's a really good point. So I think it's worth doing a little bit of math.
Okay.
And I say this in the book, actually. I love doing arithmetic. I don't like doing maths, actually, like algebra and all that kind of stuff. Like I scrape through my AS levels. But so when we do the math of 1.2, or like in your case, because you exercise regularly, you could probably benefit from that higher level, especially if you spoke to Stacey Sims. She's a big fan of like the higher amounts, which, as long as everything is in balance, I'm totally on board with. So you want to be looking at your ideal body weight. So let's say we're looking at someone who is overweight. Maybe they're overweight by 20 kilos or so. You don't want to be using your current weight, which is 20 kilos plus. You want to be using your ideal weight. So whatever the kilogram amount that you times that 1.2 by or 1.6, you want to be using that ideal body weight. Similarly, if you are underweight as well, you want to be using your ideal body weight. So that's the first part of the equation. Then let's say we'll use myself because I can do the math a little bit in my head. I'm around 75 kilos. I'm trying to opt for 1.6 grams. That's my ideal body weight. So ergo, I need to be consuming around 120 grams of protein per day, which is 40 grams of protein split across 3 different meals, for argument's sake, as that's the typical eating pattern. What does 40 grams of protein look like in a typical meal? All right, so let's take, and I have a picture, a number of different pictures in the book, because I want people to be good estimators or guesstimators of protein when they make their breakfast. So if I think about...
Let me get it out.
Yeah, sure.
Look, are you impressed what I brought your book with me?
I'm very impressed that you got it. Yeah, that's the page there.
If you're on YouTube or listening, maybe it's on Spotify, they now have our full videos up. You'll be able to see. So, okay, talk us through this.
So for this morning's breakfast, for me, I had 150 grams of Greek yogurt. So that was a good couple of heaped tablespoons. Okay. I know from this diagram that Greek yogurt is around 10 grams of protein per 100 grams.
Full fat,
always full fat. And it's strained. So any strained yogurt is going to be high in protein because you're getting rid of some of the water, and the sort of technique sort of concentrates those proteins. So 150 grams, I'm looking at about 12 grams of protein there. I enriched this with some peanut butter. Peanut butter is...
Now you're talking my language.
I love peanut butter. Like crunchy, 100%, no added salt, no added palm oil, none of that, no added sugar, none of that stuff. By just adding a couple of tablespoons of that, we're enriching that yogurt, and we're boosting that yogurt by around 7 or 8 grams of protein. So that's 20 grams in total. I'm going to add a handful of mixed nuts to that. So that's, again, around 8 grams or so, depending on how big your hand is. And then I'm also going to have that with some berries. And on the side, I had some of my Doctor's Kitchen bread with a bit of hummus as well. So it was a bit of a mix and match situation this morning. And that got me close to, I'd say, 35 grams of protein just from those elements. So that for me is like a healthy high protein breakfast. It's got nuts and seeds, they're anti-inflammatory. I've got some berries in there. I've got my protein, I've got my base. That's like an ideal way of eating. Let's say I haven't had lunch yet, but my lunch is going to be some like do you know Farmer J's?
Yeah.
I love Farmer J's. It's so
great.
Good. It's just like so easy because everything's
created that.
I know. I really feel like I should have. I like, and when it came out, I was so jealous. I was like, Farmer J's, that name sucks. but in all honesty, like, it's really good. So, if anyone's in London, you know what I mean. They have these field trays and you can see everything.
And they portion it out, don't they?
Portion it out. And so if I go to Farmer J's, I know I tend to eat plant-based when I'm out. So I will go for the tempeh option. If you look at tempeh in the book, per 100 grams, it's around 25 grams of protein, which is
People might not even heard of tempeh. By the way.
Tempeh is a fermented soybean product, and the benefit, and I talk about this in the book as well, the benefit of fermenting your legumes is that it increases the availability of those proteins. It makes it slightly more gut healthy as well, because you've got some of those parabiotic benefits of the microbes. It tastes delicious as well, and it's easier to digest. So that, 200 grams of that's going to give you around 30 grams of protein as a minimum. And then I'm going to be having it with like grains and like some greens and stuff. All those different elements, like your grains and your greens, they also have protein in as well. Not very much. And I put that in the...
Apart from quinoa.
Yeah.
Because quinoa is actually more of a protein food than a carbohydrate food, which is different to rice.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pseudo grain, so it's not strictly a grain. It's a seed, which is why it's got like a weird sort of look to it when you cook it. But you're right. Yeah, quinoa is like slightly higher in protein, and then even your greens. So when you have like a cup of greens, like 100 grams, that's around anywhere between 2 or 3 grams of protein in that alone. A lot of people realize that. So every little bit adds up. And this is where you can actually quite easily achieve a healthy, high protein meal with some of these different elements as well. And I have this sort of like thing, I don't think I wrote about it in the book, but you want to start with your core protein. So that could be chicken or fish or tempeh or tofu. These are high quality proteins. eggs, another really good high quality protein, about 6 grams per average egg, cooked. Then you want to have a plant-based partner. So that could be your legumes, it could be lentils, because as you'll realize when you read the book, lentils and chickpeas, when they're cooked, are relatively low in protein. They're not a core protein source. So they average between 6 and 8 grams per 100 gram of cooked bean. And even at the higher one, like black beans and pinto, we're looking at 8 to 9 grams. So it's not, A, it's not complete protein, and B, it's not enough total protein either. So you want to have a core protein, plant-based partner, and a topper. And the topper could be nutritional yeast. It could be hemp seeds, one of my favorite seeds. They're about 30 grams of protein per 100 grams. It could be mixed nuts. It could be peanut. It could be whatever you want. But if you have this formula every single mealtime, that's how you're going to easily get to your protein goal. And then dinner, last night my wife came back from a holiday and I cooked her, it was like an arrabbiata sauce, with I think we put aubergine in it, I put chickpeas in it, some chicken that I'd made. I spatch cooked some chicken at the weekend, so I just shaved a bit of that, and then I added some protein through that, and then added some moringa leaves. Have you ever used moringa leaves fresh?
I've never heard of that.
Oh man, so there's like a Turkish store nearby to us. We live in North London, and moringa fresh is like a really bitter version of rocket. And when you put it into a sauce with tomatoes and other acidic, it kind of mellows the flavor and is absolutely delicious. But if you don't want to be that bougie, you can just use spinach.
At one point, kale wasn't
I know,
bougie. Now
yeah.
it is. It's having a moment, and it's costing more than anything else in the supermarket.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of cavolo nero as well.
Yeah,
but
me too.
That's how, I want people to visualize what it means to eat a high protein meal in a healthy way, because we've been led to believe that high protein has to be chicken, chicken for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert. It doesn't have to look like that. That's bland, it's boring. It's this idea of high protein having to be about muscle food and muscle growth. And whilst that's very important to preserve, particularly as it pertains to the longevity sphere, it does not need to look that mundane and bland. And as a foodie, I would never create a book that was just about just the single protein source.
You just mentioned there a terminology that's really interesting. It's a buzzword, and I believe in I believe I'm all for healthspan medicine. Things that are going to help improve our quality of life, get us to live, enjoy our quality of life longer. Longevity is a term that I'm finding a little bit harder to relate to now, just because of the sphere that it's gone in. But protein is having its moment in the longevity circles. So we now understand how much protein we should be having, around 1.2 grams, potentially up to 1.6. You just explained so well how we can kind of distribute that through our day in terms of food and food quality and nourishment, because they also contain great polyphenols in there and fibrous foods. They all are a great mix and blend. But why is protein so connected to this longevity space that is just booming and booming and booming?
Yeah, I think it's because we've realized the pragmatic approach to increasing health span is having a muscle-centric view of healthy aging. And I even struggle with that, because I don't think it's all about muscles, as I said earlier. I think it's also about bone health, our immune health, skin health, etc. And for that, we need protein. So
it's the building block.
Exactly. So just stepping back a bit, the reason why I'm so passionate about this subject is because proteins are literally the building blocks of life. So when you consume protein, whether it's coming from tempeh or edamame or nuts and seeds, you break it down into the corresponding amino acids, of which there are 9 essential, 20 odd that are non-essential, but it's a bit of weird terminology. Depending on who you ask, that there are 22, some say more or less. That aside, we break it down into these corresponding aminos, and then they are repackaged into, whether it's part of your organ, whether it's an immune cell, whether it's a bone cell. These are all parts of the same protein Lego-like blocks. And so when we get older, the ability of us to actually package and build these same molecules is impaired for a number of different reasons. A lot of people say mitochondrial health, so that's the sort of energy organelles. Yeah, they actually have a role in like immune health and cell signaling as well. But yeah, they're sort of colloquially known as the power, the battery cells of our cells. And then when you think about this from the perspective of what kills older people, what knocks them for six, it is frailty. It's falls. It's literally falls. And why do people fall? It's because of a blend of poor stability, poor proprioception, so the ability of us to think of our body in space, and also the musculature that will enable us to be solid. And the reason why is because A, we're not very good at exercising, and B, we're very sedentary, I'd say. But B, there is
sitting on a sofa.
Yeah,
talking.
I know. Yeah, I always think about myself when I'm doing a podcast and I talk about this concept. But importantly, there is a natural degradation of our muscles as we age over time, and that's just unfortunately inevitable. It's not to say that you can't reverse that with exercise, in particular, and protein, but it is generally what happens if you don't do anything about it. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you look at a dumbbell and you can build muscle. When you're older than that, you have to work a lot harder.
But I also think that the reason why this is so important, because obviously we have such a variety of listeners on the show, from people from 20s to, up to 60s, is that you have to start young. Getting your body attuned to this now and getting the signaling going and on all of these exercises and building that muscle growth helps the prevention, right? Rather than getting to 50 and thinking, okay, now I need to start weight training or thinking about protein. We really need to be thinking about this when we're 20.
I think an analogy is our pensions, right? So in a perfect world, everyone would have started an ISA account and not spent any penny of their ISA and contributed the max amount every single year from age 18. And that's their ISA and their pension as well.
Also, please do that. It's so tax
I know,
beneficial.
it's so good. And I wish I did this for myself as well. But this is the correct analogy to be using, because in the same way investing in our pension is great for our financial health, investing in our muscle health and our stability and our core strength, this is great for our overall health as we get older as well. So, and for the reasons that we discussed earlier, it gets harder to consume enough protein when you're older. Your threshold is a lot higher to increase your muscles and your bone health. So you need to start early as early as possible. And the evidence is clear that, if you are less frail, you're less likely to have the fall, and you're less likely to experience the risks of having fall. And it's a really, really big problem. So the best medicine is to try and prevent that as much as possible. And one of the ways in which we do that is by getting enough protein, but also exercise. And I think exercise is probably the biggest lever, even though I know I've just written a book about high protein. I think I say in the book, it was like, I don't want to convince you otherwise. Exercise is the best, but protein is a very close second.
Well, they're two co-partners, right? Exactly. I'm glad to that, because I mean, this is not a sob story, but I lost my grandmother in COVID to a fall. And you kind of I think about her and I go, wow, she was so switched on. Her mind was there, she had so many amazing more years in herself. But the thing that killed her was her hip broke when she went up too quickly to try and get the post. And that made me think about all of these different combinations of how I should be living now, which is really important. Because I think a lot of us think about chronic disease and inflammation, and that's the next question, around inflammation. But I do think that we don't ever think about just taking our health for granted and having a fall. And that could be the end.
It literally could be, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so sad, but it's so common.
So let's go to anti-inflammatory foods.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think let's take it up a level, if we can. Anti-inflammatory foods. So it's interesting. I actually got a text yesterday from a really good friend saying, "Hi babe, how are you? My husband's mother-in-law has just been." Also, I don't want this to also all feel like this is for people that are 60 plus, but this is why I want me to think about it now. My mother-in-law's just been diagnosed with arthritis and she's got it in her hands. What anti-inflammatory foods are good? and I was literally had your book open on the anti-inflammatory index.
Wow.
And I was like, well, this is obviously something that people want to know about. I'm sure you are that person on speed dial for many of your friends when something happens in the family and your people are going, well, can I ask your advice? So, inflammation, it's such a big topic that's spoken about. It's the lead of any chronic disease. And there's so many factors that can influence our inflammation, from stress. Exercise also influences our inflammation, but also food and also environment and, products that we're using, things around the home. But people might not have heard of the anti-inflammatory kind of index. So I want to talk about anti-inflammatory foods and the dietary inflammatory index. And so there's a really interesting study where I just want to touch upon before we get into what that is, which was an analysis of 128,612 people from the UK Biobank participants aged 60 plus. Now, it basically showed something very interesting, which looked at higher plant protein and fiber intakes, which were associated with significantly lower CRP levels, which are your inflammatory markers, whereas higher animal protein was linked to higher CPR levels, which is very interesting because I always find that a really interesting marker for people. And obviously people with inflammatory bowel disease can have very high levels of this when they're going into attack. So can you start first of all explaining what this is and why it's important and what foods are contained in it? Because from that, it's more plant-based foods.
And you'd imagine that, wouldn't you? Like, the results of that to me and you are probably not that surprising. Increasing plant protein, increasing fiber, lo and behold, reduces inflammation across the majority of people. But I think this whole idea of inflammation is, I want to reframe it slightly for folks, because I think people think of inflammation as universally a bad thing. And actually, inflammation is so important for our body. It's the reason why me and you can have this conversation in the middle of London, surrounded by environmental pollutants from the exhaust fumes, surrounded by viruses, surrounded by all these different unfortunate pathogens, and still thrive and not come down to florid sepsis or like a generalized infection. So the way I like to get people to conceptualize inflammation is it's kind of like your internal campfire. And your internal campfire, if you imagine, like we go away to the British countryside or something, and we set up camp and we do what every good sort of like camping holiday does: get sticks and put a campfire on, get some marshmallows going. A campfire is a wonderful thing. It provides beautiful light, it provides warmth, it could keep predators out, we can cook our food on it. It's great. But if our campfire was to go unwieldy, it was to get out of control, we might overcook our pasta. If we're eating pasta,
the Italians would be so upset.
We might burn ourselves. It could become so unruly that it burns the entire campsite down. This is sort of like the language of your immune system. It's getting this balance correctly. On the one side, we need inflammation. On the other side, too much inflammation can be a bad thing. And so whilst it has a role in fighting pathogens and signaling as part of your immune system, when that becomes completely out of whack, this is where issues arise. And we know that people with excess inflammation, and there are multiple ways in which we can measure inflammation in the body, although I think the way we measure it currently today is quite crude. So we use things like CRP or high sensitivity CRP. In research, we use things like interleukins, like IL-6. You might see there's some papers if you read them online. We know that people with raised inflammation have higher risks of metabolic disease. We know it's associated with obesity. We know that it's even associated with mental health issues as well. High inflammation that can come from diet or sedentary behavior. Autoimmune conditions as well. All these different things. So we know that as a foundation, we want to be bringing our inflammation levels in balance. And the reason why our inflammation levels high is because of diet, so lack of fiber, feeding our gut microbes, ensuring that not having enough of the polyphenols in our diet.
Can you explain what they are very quickly?
So
People might not know
polyphenols
that.
are colorful pigments that you find in different fruits and vegetables, but also beige ones as well. I think we forget about mushrooms and onions. Those have like novel plant chemicals that are great. There are literally something around 7,000 or 8,000 phytochemicals that have been identified, many of which are not studied, some of which you might have come across, like resveratrol, because everyone loves to talk about resveratrol because it's in red wine, but it's also in like dried grapes and peanuts and all that kind of stuff, or quercetin that you find in allium vegetables, onions. But there are literally thousands, and we haven't actually like fully grasped how important all of them they are together. My perspective is you want to hedge bets and just try and get as many different polyphenols in your diet as possible. The other things that can raise inflammation, apart from the absence of some of those elements in the diet, are things like sedentary behavior, like what we're doing right now. So
do we have to like do star jumps in between?
I know, like I feel
every
like
10 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very twitchy, so I do like shift around. But yeah, like the way I like people to think of sedentary behavior, particularly if you work in an office-based environment, is like your inflammation level creeps up the longer you are like in this position. So it just like goes up every hour. It just like, and what you want to do is discharge. And it's very unscientific, but you want to discharge some of this inflammation by getting up, going outside, maybe doing some lunges, star jumps if you like. This sort of like brings it back down into level, because exercise as a net effect is actually anti-inflammatory. In the short term, it's pro, but in the long term, it's anti-inflammatory. The other things that probably doesn't get enough airtime, stress, poor sleep, loneliness. These are all things
They're all massive factors.
Yeah, big factors.
But going back to the index of the anti-inflammatory foods, so you mentioned some polyphenols. So basically most plant-based foods, right? That would be like some of the highest, because I bet people listen to this going, oh, what about turmeric? I thought that was an anti-inflammatory food. And so there's been a few buzzwords on what anti-inflammatory foods is. But for anyone maybe struggling with high amounts of inflammation, maybe that's an autoimmune condition, maybe it could be a mixture of things. And as you said, it's also very linked to mental health. What should they be looking in this index of foods that's going to lower the inflammation or support it?
So aside from like, trying to address the pro-inflammatory factors, diet is one of those big levers. I would say probably secondary to exercise again, but diet is a really, really big lever. Why didn't you write a book on exercise? I know. I'd have to do a lot more research. So the way to think about anti-inflammatory foods is group them into categories. And this is largely based on the DII, so the Dietary Inflammation Index, something that we actually used when we created our anti-inflammatory category on the Doctor's Kitchen app as well. So every recipe broadly is anti-inflammatory, and we did the math on that as well, which is a lot of math. So herbs and spices, really easy ways to get strong anti-inflammatory foods into your diet. So if you look at the ORAC scores, the antioxidant scores, the DII scores, these all score the highest, i.e. they are the most anti-inflammatory. So things like turmeric, clove, cinnamon, kitchen counter herbs, oregano, basil, marjoram, these are just as impressive in terms of the anti-inflammatory effects. A lot of them are down to their unique polyphenols. But because we don't consume them in significant quantities, whilst they are the most powerful, they overall will contribute some, but not the majority, I would say, of the anti-inflammatory benefit of your entire diet. Fats, really, really important. So extra virgin olive oil, as an example, is again very anti-inflammatory. You also have things like nuts and seeds. That's why like a handful of nuts and seeds, I think, is great for everyone every single day. It's been shown in the PreDimed study. It's been shown in multiple different studies to be net beneficial for your heart as well.
And it's polyunsaturated fats. Just want to mention that rather than like trans fats.
Yeah. I mean, trans fats, generally, luckily we don't have too much of that in our diet, if any at all. But yeah, mainly poly and monounsaturated fatty acids. Also, they contain things like vitamin E, which we know can contribute to healthy heart, healthy brain, anti-inflammatory again. And then also the types of nuts all have their different sort of varying ratios of fats as well. So again, like I just take a spread betting approach. I don't just focus on one nut like pistachios. I focus on sunflower seeds and hemp seeds and tahini, nut butters, all that kind of stuff. So you want to try and get a good, healthy collection of fats. Also from things like fatty fish. So salmon, sardines, herring, the smaller the better. Anchovies I absolutely love. I know that's a bit...
I put them on my omelette.
Oh, I put them everywhere. Yeah, I put them into like curries and stews. Yeah, maybe not my bath. Sometimes I eat them straight from the can, to be honest, but or the glass jar. But yeah, so these are really, really good quality fats. These fatty acids that contribute to resolvins and anti-inflammatory action. So you want to be getting like oily fish, and then berries. So the colorful fruits. I have a penchant for berries because they tend to be high in some of these powerful anti-inflammatory chemicals, anthocyanins and the like. I get them fresh where I can, but also frozen is also a good strategy, particularly for things like blackcurrants, bilberries. These are all like really high in anthocyanins. In fact, blackcurrants, I believe, are the highest in anthocyanins, maybe secondary to haskell. So they're a type of phytochemical or plant chemical that are responsible for the deep purple blue color that you get in berries. So blueberries and black currants and have you heard of something called the haskell berry?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
And many years ago, there was a company that started in this space.
Yeah. So they have a product. I don't know the company personally, but like they have a product where they've freeze dried and powdered these berries that are hard to get in the UK. I think they're grown in Canada.
Yeah.
But those I think are the highest in anthocyanins. So I mean, it's not like a top trumps game here. Like you're not just trying to always go for the top ones. Again, it's about diversity.
Same with things like aubergines.
Yeah, exactly.
They're high in it as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So you want to try and get it from as many different sources as possible, because what one like an onion might be lacking in terms of anthocyanins or other pigments, a white onion will certainly make it up in other ways. Maybe that's quercetin or allicin, whatever it might be. So the best approach is just trying to get it from multiple different sources. And the other thing is fiber. And the reason why fiber is anti-inflammatory is because you are supporting these microbes, many of whom are working to reduce inflammation in your body as well, nourishing the gut cells with their metabolites. So they work away, they digest the food, they create these fatty acids, and those nourish the colonocytes, the lining of your cells. They reduce the permeability of your gut. That in turn reduces the overactivation of your immune system, that reduces inflammation as a net effect. So if you're doing these things across the board, you're getting herbs and spices, you're getting oily fish, you're getting extra virgin olive oil, you're getting berries, you're getting good quality fats, you're getting enough fiber, like getting a really good dose of this anti-inflammatory medicine. And I have this thing called BBGs. I don't know if you've come across it before, but beans, berries, greens, seeds, and nuts every single day. You want to try and get one of each of these every single day. It doesn't need to be all the same meal, but like handful of berries, handful of beans or legumes, lentils, whatever you like. Greens, I try and get greens at every meal, even breakfast, but a couple of portions cooked, and seeds and nuts, a handful every day. If you hit your BBGs every single day, it's one of the most potent anti-inflammatory medicines I think you can take.
I'm going to put this in a context and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I'm not. It sounds like the Mediterranean diet. I'm just trying to keep it as simplified as possible for people, right? Where, the Mediterranean diet is probably one of the most well-studied diets out there, right? When it comes to nutrition and health, whether that even be for things like mental health, when we look at the SMILES trial by Philly Stracker, all the way kind of across the board, the Mediterranean diet seems to be kind of one of the most supported and studied areas for your health overall. And so what I'm hearing is a lot of the Mediterranean diet foods are in this anti-inflammatory index.
Totally. Yeah. If you look at the Mediterranean diet as a whole through the lens of the DII, it is anti-inflammatory. If you look at like even the most, I know food pyramids and plates are like out of fashion at the moment. If you remove some of the refined products that they have on the plate, I would say that's net anti-inflammatory. The modified Mediterranean diet, like the MIND diet for dementia and brain health, again, anti-inflammatory. So there are common themes throughout different diets that have been studied that are like, generally healthy, plant-focused, whole, removing refined products and using good quality fats.
Yeah. So what I want to come on to now, which I know is a bit of a spin because we've just spoken about anti-inflammatory foods, which is predominantly Mediterranean based, it sounds like. We've spoken in depth about protein, about why it's important for the lifespan and how we can, again, diversify protein throughout the day and the different types of sources. You're laughing because you know what I'm about to bring up. But I was like reading today's interview and thinking, what else is really on topic right now? And I'm just going to throw in an IV drip of NAD.
Yeah.
Random, I know, but so in context, right? Because
Yeah.
everything that we're talking about, I don't want it to sound simple because it's not, because when we actually break it down, we've really got to rethink our habits and how we're going to structure these in the day and prep time and, making sure that we reduce the friction in all of these areas to create a healthy foundation of a diet in everyone's busy lives. It's easier said than done. But the interesting thing is that I was on this, again, like a longevity type of panel last week. And everyone was asking about this topic. It was kind of like one of the biggest things. So I've just written a big article on it for Substack. And I thought actually it might be really interesting to talk about this today. So, and then you said actually it's been asked of you a few times.
Yeah.
So NAD, it's a supplement that so many people are now trying to take intravenously within their taking it as an IV drip. One, I wanted to ask your thoughts on that as a medical doctor, or people are taking it in supplement forms, which is less absorbable, but we can kind of get into that in the beginning. First of all, can you explain what NAD is for people that are listening that don't know what it is? And what are your thoughts on kind of the hype around it at the moment?
Yeah, so I looked into NAD when I had someone on the podcast a few years talking about it. And it was still quite new to me then. And honestly, it's still quite new to me now. But from what I've seen, I'm not convinced that it's a good spend of your time or your money, because these drips do take a while as well to to take. So what is NAD? So NAD is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide.
That's it.
Okay, or abbreviated as NAD+.
Yes.
And it's really interesting as a molecule because it is a cofactor in the energy generation within the cell, the mitochondria. So it 100% has a role. And the interest in the longevity space is the amounts of this molecule appear to decline over time.
As we age.
Which is why a lot of people are taking versions of NAD or the precursor called NMN, which is the mono, or not the dinucleotide, but the mononucleotide of that, in an attempt to reasonably increase NAD in the cell. The issue is, whilst we might have seen some of these effects in rodent models and in animal models, there's real lacking human trial evidence. And for anyone that knows anything about pharmaceutical drug trials, just because you've seen it in an animal model does not mean that it's going to be the same in the human. In fact, the vast majority of drugs have been completely pulled or not even made it to, past the first phase of human trials because they just didn't work. So that's the first thing I think people need to wrap their head around. When you see an animal study or you see someone promoting it based on an animal study, red flag straight away. It should just be, that's interesting. It's cool. I love some of these animal-based studies, but it does not translate into an evidence-based action to take in the human world. So when you look at the issues around NAD boosters or NMN, like you alluded to, there's the form factor. So supplements, oral intake tends to be completely digested and there's nothing that goes into your bloodstream. So people had the smart idea of, okay, well, let's do an IV drip. IV drip sort of bypasses that metabolism and that metabolic pathway. But again, there's no evidence that it actually gets into the place where you want it in the cell. And in fact, we don't actually know a lot about that conduit between the mitochondria, so these organelles in your cell, and the cytoplasm, which is the space around the cell. We actually don't know a lot about that relationship as in of itself. So the fact that people can say, oh, okay, well, we're going to take this and it's going to somehow get from your bloodstream into your mitochondria and it's going to have this magnificent benefit on longevity, I think is a real far stretch today. I'm happy to have my mind changed when some human trial
Same.
evidence comes, but I have not seen anything remotely close to the hype that is being generated around this to qualify for me taking time out of my day to sit and have an IV drip for an hour or 2 hours, where actually, if you want the best bang for your buck, if you're interested in mitochondrial health, which people should be, go and do exercise, do a HIIT train, do a zone 2 training, do anything that increases mitochondrial biogenesis that we can actually measure from biopsies and stuff. That's where I'd put my money. Do maybe some cold exposure if you want as well. Maybe there's some benefits of that. I'm much more convinced of that evidence than I am for the NMN supplementation evidence. The other things I would say, which again doesn't get talked about enough, I would invest in therapy. Like if I had the choice between spending £100 or £200 on an IV supplement a couple of times a week. We don't know what the dosing is either.
No,
like that's
I
the
know,
thing.
I'm about
Like,
to talk about that.
yeah, I've got no idea how much we should be taking, whether it should be a daily thing, whether it's a weekly thing. I've got no idea. So I would rather spend my money having 2 sessions of therapy every single month. Like I think it's going to have a much better impact on longevity or health span than any of these supplements. So I'm really, really bearish on NAD boosters in total, as you can probably tell, but happy to be convinced otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just bringing up what I had written about, and I said exactly the same thing. And that's why I started writing about this, because I was on that panel, but also I'd had an NAD drip, because I always find it interesting. I want to go and trial things. And I actually had it taken out of me because it made my heart, because obviously it's energy, right?
Yeah.
So you do feel quite flustered. That's one of the side effects. But my heart, it was interesting. You were talking about 200 beats a minute. I don't know what mine was. Probably wasn't anywhere near that. But I was getting really like flustered, hot, overwhelmed. My heart was going really, really fast. I thought I was going to pass out. And I was like, this needs to come out of me. This does not feel like this is doing that's good for me. And I wanted to read a bit more into it. And, you know, I wanted to look at the clinical trials after that, because I was thinking, well, what have I just done to my body? And they were short. They're not long-term trials. I think that's also what we've got to think about, right? These are short trials that have been done. Then they don't have meaningful clinical outcomes yet. And I think a lot of these places are from quite luxurious places that are giving these treatments out with people that can spend that money. And when we're thinking about it, like I was actually going, well, what's the risks versus the benefits? And the theoretical concern is that yes, NAD supports cell growth, DNA repair, like those things we do know. But some researchers are exploring whether excessive NAD, hence why dosage is really important, IV drips, you're getting an excessive amount in an IV drip, right? Could even fuel cancer cell proliferation. And I think about this in synergy with nutrients. I'm not saying that this is what all IV drips do that give nutrients. And there's sometimes when people are very deficient in certain things, they do need it medically. But I'm talking about not medically, right? I'm talking about people going into clinics and just asking for certain drips to get these huge infusions. For me, when I was taught in biochemistry and nutritional science, it was all about nutrients and vitamins and minerals that all work together in something called synergy. You know, they all kind of are cofactors of one another. And when you swamp your body with one huge thing and none of the others, you're automatically going to be putting them out of balance.
Yeah.
And I don't think we think about it with these things. And so when I'm looking at, if someone's deficient, then of course we need to be topping them up because they're deficient. They don't have enough in their body. But right now, this is so early that are we testing for how much is in their body? Are we testing it versus what the dosages are? And so, when I kind of see that it could be, linked to cancer cell proliferation, my ears tweak up a bit.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's an important topic to bring up. And also when I was looking at it, I was like, well, where does it come in food? And it is, if we look at the ways that we can support it through diet, and I put it through here, we can look at it through green vegetables, fish, mushrooms, edamame. All of these can help as the precursors to NAD. So again, focusing again on the things that we know aren't going to be detrimental, I think are really, really key.
I think it's a really important point you made about dose, because we know from the large trials looking at multivitamins or high dose vitamins, and even, vitamins that you just buy off the shelf from your local health food store, when taken at an excessive dose consistently for the wrong person who might have precancerous lesions, completely unbeknownst to that individual. I mean, we, not to scare everyone, but we have cancer cells around our body circulating every second of every day, and our immune system is just like a targeted SWAT team going around our body and like removing any malfunctioning, dysfunctional cells. If we start giving molecules that could be amping up the defenses, it's almost like arming a bunch of terrorists in our body. And it's a bit of a stark analogy there, but like, it's not what you want to be doing. And as a one-off, like, probably not going to do any harm.
No.
I don't think you've got to worry about it. But if this is something that you do like
all the time,
once a month or a couple of times a week, I mean, the honest answer is I have no idea. I mean,
I don't think anyone does. I don't think anyone could sit there and give a full explanation that they know exactly what's going to happen if you do it every single 100%. Week, because the research isn't there yet.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I think these packages that are being sold, I hope they've got a lot of insurance, because if a year down the line, someone suddenly has a cancer lesion that's found on a screening, and you do a history, and you're like, what have you been doing for the last like couple of years? I'm like, oh, well, I exercise, I look after my diet, and I've been doing these NAD plus IV drips. I would be very fearful to be the individual that is selling those, because I mean, they're unlicensed, and I think someone's trying to make it a pharmaceutical product in the US. Whether or not that is coming from a commercial perspective or whether it's because they genuinely think it should be a pharmaceutical product, I'm not too sure. But the research today, I would say it's probably A, not a good spend of your money, and B, complete unknown. Yeah, complete unknown.
So it brings me back to a question that I want to make sure that we finish with, which is, we've spoken about the food, we've spoken about like evidence-based ways to increase protein and anti-inflammatory foods, and to maybe bypass the NAD drips. Try it if you want, but the jury is out on clinical evidence. I see all the time nutritional myths come up. Sometimes I would think, should I just go into myth busting? And then I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I was like, when you're sitting here today, I'd love to ask you, which I haven't asked you yet, and I was wondering what you were going to say, but what's one of the biggest nutritional myths that you're seeing online right now going around that you're just like, we need to cancel that out? That's not true, and it's harmful.
Probably that we eat enough protein. I'll probably get some comments about that, but probably that, I would say. I think like we're not being respectful of the state of affairs by continually repeating this outdated idea that we eat enough protein, we don't need to worry about protein. I take the complete opposite opinion. And like I said, to caveat this, I'm not saying we need to eat more animal-based proteins. I think we probably eat enough of that. If you look at the consumption rates in the US and the UK as well, on average, we're consuming enough of that. But where we should be leaning into more of is plant-based proteins. And the benefit of that is you're not only getting the protein, which is super important, but you're also getting the fiber and the isoflavones, the phytonutrients that we've been talking about that are so useful. So that's probably the one thing I would say. And it's almost like turning the lens on ourselves somewhat, because it's very easy to point fingers at keto and carnivore and, seed oils and all this kind of stuff. It's really, really easy to just blame. But actually, I think a true reflection and a true sort of way of weeding out misinformation, if you like, is actually turning the lens on ourselves, because we're not perfect. We're fallible, and I've probably got things wrong as well. I have got things wrong many times in the past. And one of the things I got wrong was protein. And I was just, slinging out the same response about protein, and it was incorrect.
Yeah, well, that just means that you're not a reductionist, which is great. Because science is always evolving, and you've got to evolve with it. Otherwise, you just stay in a lane. And actually, science is the one thing I think a good scientist is always being able to say, oh, well, I didn't realize that. Now I've changed my mind on this thing. Yeah,
when the data change, you
have to be flexible. We spoke about earlier the spotlight effect on the Substack 5 questions, which I'd really love people to go, because that was really like who Rupy is and so much wisdom that you've learned from back in 2003, really, when you first started med school. And so I wanted to kind of end with like, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to people listening now and listening today? Like whether it's health or a piece of wisdom or something that for you, I think health is all encompassing. It's not just the food that you put on the plate.
Yeah.
It's not just the amount of hours that you get in bed. Health is also so much about mindset, emotion, resilience. It's all kind of weaved together. So for people kind of listening to this right now, like what's the one piece of advice that you'd like to leave them with?
I think it's important to know your needs. So when I say needs, I'm talking about NEES. So know which aspect of your lifestyle that you need to put extra effort in. So that's nutrition. Is it emotional health? Is it exercise? Is it sleep? I think we were talking about 80-20 or 90-10 earlier. Just knowing where you need to put a little bit more effort in is a nice framing practice. And I know for me, my nutrition is great. My exercise is okay. My emotional health is great. Sleep is really, really poor for me at the moment. And so that's what I'm putting more emphasis on. But for someone else, it might be completely different. You know, they might sleep like a log. They might have real refreshing, energetic sleep. And then, you know, the nutrition is all over the place. So knowing your needs, knowing where you want to put your chips, where you want to put some extra energy, it's just a good practice to ensure that you're putting your energy in the right direction.
I love that you explained that because at one point I thought you meant your actual knees.
No.
And I was like, what is in the knees that I didn't know about? This hasn't talked to me about biomechanics at one point. Your knees are also very important. But no, I think it's really interesting. I think we can look at these needs a lot when it comes to work. I think a lot of people can, you know, do their plan of the year or their end of year review or like their quarterly review or whatever that is. And they can go, well, where do we need more emphasis and where have we kind of fallen short this month? And so like often we don't do it for ourselves and we put ourselves last. And so actually like spreading that knowledge to your own personal life is really important. And I've now started, you know, I used to always make, although Oliver Burkeman told me to not make lists because he was like, they're not helpful. But I do make a list of things that I have to kind of achieve in the week. But now I also make a personal list. And before it was just work focused. And it was just like, these are things that I need to hit. These are things that I need to do. This is how I'm going to distribute my time. And then I looked at my diary and I was thinking, wow, this is really where you prioritize everything. There was no personal needs in there ever. And so now in the beginning of the week, I make my work list and I still do everything I need to hit, but I make my personal list.
Yeah.
And it's been a real, for me, I don't want to say hardship because it's not been hardship, but it's been a real kind of mindset change in the fact that I'm allowed to do that and not feel guilty. I think I used to always put my personal needs at the very end of the day when I get in at 10 o'clock and I think, well, what have I not done yet? But actually now I distribute it because I think your diary reflects really where you put most of your time and energy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we forget to look at it like that.
It's important to just look back at the previous week and just see where your energy was sucked and where you actually need to put more emphasis in. And I think like just your needs or knowing your needs is a good sort of framing exercise for me at least anyway.
Yeah, it's good because it's flexible. That's the biggest thing, right? It's flexi. So Rupy, you've been an amazing guest.
Thank you.
We spoke about so much from the personal side on the 5 questions to everything on the importance of, I guess, lifespan and health span right now. The question I asked to everyone, which you might know if you've listened, is what does live well, be well mean to you?
For me, it means living in harmony with what my body is telling me. And I think being intuitive about where I need to put extra energy, for me, that's how I live well because the answers are in us. And I think if we take the time to listen, as I was mentioning on the exercise that I did with the silent retreat, the answers come up. And you can be your own expert and know exactly where you need to put your energy.
That's the self-trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
That comes with wisdom and lots of learning.
Yeah.
Rupy, thank you. I have obviously shown this book if you've been watching on YouTube or listening where we put our videos, but this is such an amazing book.
Thank you.
You really do put the kind of practicality into making things a little bit easier, but also just delicious. Like the thing that I have always connected food to is nutritious and delicious. And I think when we can think about the word healthy, it's so often related to just being boring. And my dad still, even though I cook for him all the time, goes, you don't want me to live off just a lettuce leaf. And I'm like, no, but that also is not healthy.
Yeah.
You know, and so you do create such delicious, vibrant,
thank you,
gorgeous foods. And it's an amazing one. So everyone should go and buy this book.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're from a former nutritionist. It's something that I'm already got my top 5 in there.
Nice.
And yeah, I'm gonna make sure I actually like realize what my protein is. What are you talking about this? The kind of imposter syndrome is going, oh my God, what was mine?
Everyone should know the number.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it.